My name is Ivy Bennett. I'm 36 years old and live in a quiet lakeside town in Vermont. That day, I had just returned from a 10-day business trip. I wasn't expecting a warm hug or even a kind word from my husband. All I wanted was a bit of silence, a familiar corner of the house to catch my breath. But instead, I saw a strange woman wearing my bathrobe, pouring wine from our anniversary bottle, sitting right in the middle of my living room. And him, the man who once called me his entire world, just smiled and said, "She's the real owner now." Have you ever been pushed out of your own life in such a brutal way? If you have, leave a comment below. Hit like and subscribe to support the channel. Because what you're about to hear is not just the story of a failed marriage. It's how I flipped the entire game. I still remember the day I first met Matthew at an investment seminar in Chicago. He arrived late, holding a cup of coffee, shirt still creased, but when he started talking, the entire room quieted. Confident, smooth, sharp-eyed, he was unlike anyone I'd ever met. I was a financial risk analyst, being considered for a team lead role. Matthew was a young orthopedic surgeon, newly relocated from Texas. We started with rushed lunches, then long late-night talks about the future, careers, family, and a dream of a life where we wouldn't have to choose between love and success. It's hard to tell the difference between affection and strategy when everything feels perfect in the beginning. Matthew supported my work. He'd wait patiently outside after long meetings, sit quietly while I worked on client reports. Once I joked about investing in a small startup coffee chain. He asked serious questions about the financial model and even suggested connections with doctors at his hospital looking to invest. I thought he was the ideal partner, someone who didn't just love me, but saw me as an equal. Then things started to shift. After the wedding, I moved in with Matthew to the house he picked in the Vermont suburbs. I had planned to keep my city job and work remotely a few days a week, but Matthew said, "You don't need to stress like that anymore. Your job isn't the priority now. You should focus on us having children, on building our family." I hesitated, but eventually agreed. I told my boss I needed to go part-time, only keeping a few major clients. They were disappointed, but wished me happiness. At the time, I told myself I was choosing the right thing, choosing family, choosing the husband who was always by my side. But as the days passed, I became someone I didn't recognize. Matthew began changing the way he spoke to me. Suggestions turned into judgments. "You're careless with money," he said after I bought a handbag, even though it came from my personal savings. I suggested keeping a separate account. He dismissed it. "Husbands and wives should share everything. If you keep things separate, it feels like you don't trust me." My daily schedule gradually came under his control. If I wanted to meet an old friend, he'd say, "Don't you see how negative she is? Denise always complains about her husband. Being around her just makes you doubt your own marriage." I considered calling Denise back to explain, but I didn't. Then it was my college friends. Matthew said they were too loud, not fitting for a doctor's wife. One evening, I wore a dress I loved to a charity gala with him. Matthew looked me up and down, frowned, and said, "That dress doesn't make you look like the kind of woman I'd be proud to stand next to. People will think I don't take good care of my wife." My throat tightened, but I quietly changed clothes. Claudia, my mother-in-law, made no effort to hide her discontent. She'd show up unannounced with words sharp as razors wrapped in honey. "Ivy, you're still not thinking about children? Don't wait too long. Women have a clock, you know." Or, "Matthew's wife should know how to dress properly for medical events. If you wear that, people might think your side of the family didn't teach you any manners." Once I gently disagreed with something she said. Claudia looked at me like I'd just insulted her ancestors. "A woman should never earn more than her husband, Ivy. That's how Southern families stay strong. Don't forget, you carry the Bennett name now." Matthew didn't defend me. He just said, "Mom's only saying this because she cares." Every relationship I had slowly fell apart. Every dream I once chased faded like morning mist. I no longer had a place to go to work each day. No more coffee meetups to look forward to. I lived in a luxurious house full of fresh flowers and designer furniture, but it was cold as a museum. At first, I wondered if I was just being too sensitive. But one evening, when I opened my old financial planning notebook, I nearly cried. I once built investment strategies for million-dollar corporations. Now, I had to ask before buying a scented candle or switching shampoo brands. I had become the perfect wife in my husband's eyes. I smiled when told to smile. I stayed silent in the face of injustice. I became a background character in my own life, while the man I once trusted completely directed a script I was never allowed to rewrite. What hurt most was that I once thought I was happy. I once believed that if I tried just a little harder, things would go back to how they used to be. But that past didn't exist anymore. It was just a beautiful trailer for a film I never thought I'd be the victim in. I didn't realize I was being slowly bent out of shape until I looked in the mirror and no longer saw the woman who once walked confidently into boardrooms, who once spoke in front of 100 people without fear. That girl was gone. I was now a proper wife, according to Matthew's definition. And from that moment, something inside me started to awaken. It wasn't rage, it was cold clarity. If my life had been rewritten without my consent, I would rewrite it again, this time on my own terms. I'm not the type to snoop or check my husband's phone. I used to believe trust was the foundation of a marriage. But some truths don't need to be uncovered, they show themselves, as if begging to be seen. That day, I was checking Matthew's business travel calendar on his laptop to coordinate dinner with his mother when an email alert popped up. A new message appeared on the screen with a short title. Last night was amazing. Sender, Nicole Harper. Recipient, Matthew Bennett. The first line read clearly beneath, I've never seen you like that. When is she going on another business trip? I froze. My eyes locked on the screen, like reading a few more words would make things clearer, or at least explainable. But nothing in the rest of the message eased the icy feeling crawling up my spine. I didn't open the email. I didn't reply. I just shut the laptop and pulled my hand away from the keyboard like I'd touched something scalding. That evening at dinner, I watched Matthew chat with his mother like nothing had happened, holding his wine glass with the same calm that made my chest ache. After Claudia left, I asked him directly. There was an email that popped up on your laptop today, from Nicole. Matthew looked up from his iPad, completely unfazed. Oh, that? Probably just a joke. We all tease each other like that. You know how it is. Doctors, nurses, late-night shifts. Everyone's exhausted. It's just a way to blow off steam. I said nothing. Didn't argue, because in his eyes, I saw something familiar. The look that once made me believe everything he said, and the same look that made me slowly lose the ability to tell right from wrong. That night, I turned my back to him in bed. Matthew snored softly, sleeping soundly, while I opened my old notebook. Not to write in a diary, but to start a new kind of record. I wrote a title at the top, Irregularities, Internal Tracking. From that moment on, I began to observe. Matthew's work trips had become more frequent lately. That month he said he had to fly to 3 different conferences, all conveniently scheduled over weekends. I looked up major medical events, and only one of the 3 actually existed. The other 2 were either held months ago or didn't exist at all. I started photographing hotel receipts from the trash, one from New Hampshire, another from a resort in Maine. Both listed the reservation as Matthew and guest. I tested the online booking system under Matthew's name just to see what would happen. When I reached the guest name section, I typed Nicole Harper. The system responded, returning guest, use saved profile. I shivered. One time, I accidentally found a strange transaction. 2 tickets for a musical in Boston, VIP seating, side by side. Matthew had always said he hated musicals, called them urban torture disguised as music. I checked the date. It was the weekend I had flown to visit my parents in Florida. I didn't confront him directly. Instead, I quietly gathered every shred of evidence. One email, one receipt, one bus ticket, even a picture Nicole had posted on social media before she deleted it, posing beside a swimming pool that looked exactly like the resort Matthew took me to during our first year of marriage. I once brought this up with Claudia, the only time I dared to speak to her about my suspicions. She set her teacup down with the kind of weariness that made it seem like I was sharing something trivial. A woman should trust her husband, Ivy. You're being weak, and weakness is shameful. She didn't even look at me, just kept folding her napkin. I don't think asking for clarity makes me weak, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. It's not about clarity, it's about how you're reacting. Like a woman who lacks poise, if you keep overanalyzing every email, you're going to destroy the life you've built. She stood, adjusting her hair in the mirror. A good wife protects the family with trust, not by combing through receipts. I watched her walk out, her dress perfectly pressed, her perfume so thick it clung to the walls. In that moment, I saw the entire system that had caged me, a cycle countless women before me had entered and never escaped. I went back to my room, opened my laptop, and created a new folder on my cloud drive. I named it Eden, a name that sounded like paradise but held all my hells. Inside, I stored everything. A spreadsheet listing dates, expenses, destinations, and any abnormalities. A document detailing Claudia's veiled comments, Matthew's behavioral shifts, anything that could one day matter. I no longer asked, "Why did you betray me?" I only had one question left. Who do you think you're fooling? And I knew to answer that, I had to do something the good wife had never done, become the observer, quiet, patient, and meticulously accurate. Because when the truth started seeping through the cracks, I had to be the first to catch it. No lost evidence, no more weakness. I began taking morning walks, looping around the neighborhood in a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, not to hide from neighbors, but to hide the changes happening inside me. Each step on the clean stone sidewalks was a new breath, an attempt to preserve the last clear part of myself amid a life that looked perfect but was quietly crumbling. After a week of silence and observation, I made the decision to see a lawyer. Not to file for divorce, but to learn how to hold on to what I knew would be taken from me if I didn't act. I booked the appointment under the name Eva Wells. That name had never appeared on any of my paperwork, but at that moment, it represented who I was trying to become. A woman who knew when to stay silent, who prepared with composure rather than reacted in rage. Attorney Rachel Kim's office was tucked into a quiet building at the edge of downtown. No sign, no ads. She didn't ask many questions during our first meeting, just listened. When I told her I suspected my husband of hiding assets, owning property under others' names, and possible medical misconduct, Rachel looked up at me for the first time. "Do you have any proof?" "I'm gathering it." "Then don't let him know you're working with me. Don't let him even think you're suspicious. Men like your husband, give them one sign and they'll wipe everything clean." I nodded. I didn't come here to make a scene. I came to win, rationally. Rachel helped me establish an LLC named Everpine Holdings. It sounded like a real estate investment firm, but was owned solely by me. Through this entity, I purchased a house just 1 block away from our main home. A vintage craftsman with wood siding, sloped roof, and a backyard lined with maple trees turning gold, like something new was trying to begin. I used the inheritance my mother left me before my marriage. It had always been under my name. Almost no one knew I had it, not even Matthew. I began quietly removing old furniture from our main house for donation. A table, a leather armchair, some framed prints, my grandmother's antique tea set. One by one, they appeared in the new home. I hired a security service to install discreet alarms and hidden cameras. In the garage, I added a built-in safe. Not even Rachel knew what I stored inside. Some things don't need to go to court, but must be protected for myself. By day, I played the model wife of a respected doctor. By night, I became a financial advisor for women facing financial abuse in their marriages. Women I now counted myself among. I reconnected with old professional contacts, messaged former colleagues through LinkedIn, and declined all video meetings with the excuse of poor internet at home. But in my new house, I opened my laptop, turned on the camera, and walked through asset reallocation strategies like I'd never left the industry. I soon had 3 clients. One woman's husband froze her credit cards when she refused to have a third child. Another was forced to sign the deed to their house without ever reading the contract. And one was so much like me that I felt a chill run down my spine. Her husband would say, "You have all this because of me." I heard that line echo in my mind, like an alarm. The deeper I looked into Matthew's finances, the more alarming it became. He always said, being a doctor doesn't make you rich, yet our joint account always had more than enough. But now I noticed regular wire transfers from his company to an offshore account under the name C. Bennett, Claudia's initials. Each amount was small enough to fly under tax radar, but so consistent it couldn't be coincidence. I began tracing the addresses linked to those transactions. One led to a luxury apartment in Aspen, Colorado. I suspected it might be where he and Nicole met. I hired a real estate investigator and confirmed the apartment was under Claudia's name, but had been purchased through a payment made by Matthew's medical firm. That would be a serious violation in any divorce asset division. Worse, I found an anonymous account in the prescription drug system. The IP address traced back to Matthew's office computer. The account had accessed large quantities of opioids, painkillers, that didn't match any patient records. This wasn't just financial misconduct. It pointed to an ethical danger. I never imagined my husband could be someone who abused his medical authority to move drugs. At that moment, I didn't know yet what I'd do with the information, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just watch anymore. I'd spent too long in a home where every step I took was monitored. I needed a place to breathe, and I'd built it, brick by brick, layer by layer of protection, every chair placed with intention. A home Matthew didn't even know existed. A secret world had begun to form, not for revenge, but for survival. And I knew that one day, when everything fell apart, what I'd prepared in silence would be the only thing keeping me upright. Because if he started this game with lies, I would end it with truth. That afternoon, I showed up at St. Charles Hospital, where Matthew served as department head. They were holding their annual fundraiser showcase, and even though I was no longer the woman by his side at these events, I still received an invitation from the finance office. It wasn't signed by Matthew. I went not to make a statement, but to confirm a few things. And because someone had messaged me saying Matthew wanted to meet me there. That person was Blake, Matthew's younger brother. In the Bennett family, Blake was the odd one out, the artist of the clan. Quiet, solitary, living in a loft above a ceramic studio on the outskirts of Burlington. I'd never really spoken to him alone. He was always silent at family dinners, nodding politely when I made conversation. But that night, in the middle of doctors, nurses, and donors, Blake quietly approached me at the buffet table, holding a full glass of soda. "I need to talk to you," he said quickly, not looking directly at me. "Not here. Come to the garden in the back. Fewer people." I followed him, staying cautious. What I'd learned about Matthew made me wary of everyone connected to him. But Blake didn't look at me like the others did. His gaze was hesitant, but not condescending or smug like I'd grown used to. As we stopped under the golden maple tree, Blake finally turned to face me. "You think you're the first one?" I froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're not the first person Matthew tried to control like that, and not the first one who thought about leaving." A gust of wind swept through, sending a chill down my spine. "Who are you talking about?" Blake paused for a few seconds before answering softly, "Sophia." The name dropped like a stone into still water. I had never heard of Sophia, not from anyone in the family, not in all the years I was married. I stared at him, not believing my ears. "Who is Sophia?" "Matthew's first wife," he said. They got married when he started residency. It lasted less than 2 years. The family buried the whole thing, signed non-disclosure agreements, burned all the wedding photos. You never saw anything because there was nothing left to see. I felt the blood drain from my face. And what happened to her? Blake swallowed hard. She found out Matthew was cheating, tried to leave, but she didn't have any money, no family nearby, and Matthew told our parents she was mentally unstable. They had her committed to a psychiatric facility before she could file for divorce. By the time she got out, the assets were already gone. She had nothing. Why hasn't anyone ever talked about this? Because everyone was scared. My mom used to say crazy women can't keep good doctors. And Matthew, he made people believe Sophia wasn't trustworthy. I clenched my hands together. Is she still alive? Blake nodded. She's living in a nursing home in Montpelier. I've visited her a few times, quietly. No one in the family knows. I looked at him, torn between gratitude and confusion. Why are you telling me this now? And then Blake said something that nearly broke me. Because you remind me too much of her. Quiet, patient, believing that loving him enough would fix everything. But Sophia didn't make it out in time. I don't want that happening again. I met with Sophia a week later. After verifying the information Blake gave me, I told Rachel and she helped coordinate the visit with the facility. Sophia agreed to meet. Her voice trembled on the phone. If Blake trusts you, I'll talk. The room where Sophia lived was modest but neat. The woman sitting before me had wispy silver hair, deep wrinkles, and sharper eyes than I expected. She wore a gray sweater, a worn silk scarf loosely around her neck. "You're Matthew's new wife?" she asked, her voice dry. "Not so new," I replied, "and soon not a wife at all." She gave a faint smile, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a worn brown leather notebook, its corners nearly coming apart. "Take this. I wrote in it during the last year I lived with him, not for justice, just to remind myself I wasn't insane." I flipped through the pages, slanted, tidy handwriting, records of threats Matthew made when she spoke up, times he locked the bedroom door, took away her debit cards, called a therapist she never requested. And near the end, one entry stood out. "If I disappear, it's not because I chose to." He once said, "You think you'll get away? If Ivy ever tries to leave me, I can make her disappear so much easier." I don't know who Ivy is. Now I do. My hands trembled as I read. Sophia stared at me without blinking. "You're not alone. I don't know who you are, but if you're doing what I couldn't, don't stop." I took her hand, the skin thin and cold, but her eyes burning with fire. I left the facility that day, not just with a journal, but with the growing sense that I was standing on more dangerous ground than I'd ever imagined. And worse, I started to think about Nicole. Was she just the next link in Matthew's cycle? If I stayed silent, would she become the next Sophia? Or even me? I stood across the street, watching the glow from the windows spill across the grass. Nicole's black Range Rover was parked right in front, and inside the clink of glasses and bursts of laughter, carried out from the party Matthew called the start of a new chapter. I used to think I'd cry when I was thrown out of the home I once called my sanctuary, but what I felt then was a strange calm, like still water after a storm. I was no longer the woman who stepped back whenever her husband frowned, no longer the shadow standing behind him at hospital galas. And that house, even as they used it to celebrate betrayal, was not theirs. Legally, it belonged to Everpine Holdings, and Everpine Holdings belonged to me. Rachel had everything ready. After reviewing all the deed records, corporate structure, and financial transaction history, we filed for an emergency eviction due to unlawful use of private property. No notice to Matthew, because that would only make it messier. The judge signed the order that Friday morning. Local police were assigned to enforce it Saturday afternoon, right in the middle of Claudia's party, which she had invited half the Women's League to attend. I wasn't there for revenge. I was there to reclaim what was mine. In a simple black dress, hair neatly pinned, I stepped out of Rachel's car parked a few doors down. Two uniformed officers walked beside me, holding a court order with a red seal. The wrought iron gate stood slightly ajar. Music drifted out with the clatter of glasses and Claudia's booming laughter. I walked slowly along the stone path I had once hand-picked, each step pressed deep into the earth, every echo of my heel loud and steady in my chest. Nicole was the first to see me. She stood on the porch, a glass of wine in hand, draped in the scarf I brought back from Florence. Her eyes widened, then she turned sharply inside. But I didn't need anyone to guide me. I knew every brick, every door in that house better than anyone inside. I stopped at the entryway just as Claudia raised her glass. She was talking about the struggle Matthew went through to reclaim his life after escaping a mismatched marriage. I let out a soft laugh. "Sorry to interrupt," I said, not loudly, but clearly enough that the room fell silent. "I think someone here needs to hear this from an official source." Claudia turned, her face frozen in shock. Matthew stepped out of the crowd, still holding a glass of champagne. "Hi, V. What are you doing here?" I nodded to the officer beside me. He stepped forward and ceremoniously pulled the document from his folder. "We're here to enforce an eviction from private residential property lawfully owned by Everpine Holdings." Matthew frowned, raising his voice. "This is my house. I've lived here for 12 years. "This house is no longer listed under any personal name," Rachel said, stepping in from behind me. "It was purchased through Everpine Holdings, whose sole stakeholder is my client, Mrs. Ivy Bennett. All residency activity in this home after the 20th of last month, when you signed the financial restructuring documents, has no legal standing." I didn't need to look to know the guests were staring between us. I heard a glass drop, then hurried footsteps. Claudia slowly sank into a chair, hands trembling. "No, this can't be," she whispered. "Wasn't she just the dependent?" "Maybe you forgot," I said, eyes locked on hers. "But I used to be a financial advisor. Before you told Matthew that women shouldn't out-earn their husbands." Claudia slumped into the armchair near the fireplace. Nicole quietly disappeared behind the staircase. Matthew still hadn't spoken. He just stared at me, searching for any holes in what I'd said. But there were none. Every move had been prepared over the past 3 years, ever since I realized this life wasn't mine. It was a script directed by someone else. "I don't want to ruin your party," I said, turning to the officer, "but I believe under Vermont law, unauthorized occupants must vacate the property within 3 hours of receiving an order." "We'll oversee that," the officer confirmed. Matthew gave a cold laugh. "You think you can win with this legal trick? I'll countersue you for stealing marital property." "Marital property?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Can you provide proof that you invested in Everpine Holdings? Because the current tax records and transaction logs show no contributions from you. As for the house, I'm fully prepared with documentation proving that the down payment came from my client's premarital assets." No one said another word. The lights in the house blazed bright, but inside, everything seemed to fall into darkness. A house, once seen as a symbol of family success, now stood exposed as the shell covering a web of deception. I didn't want to be there, but I had to do this. Not just for myself, but for women like Sophia. Women who were backed into corners with no way out. If I had once gone silent when thrown out of my own life, then now I would be the one to end the show. Not with screaming, but with paperwork, law, and the kind of deadly calm that comes only after surviving a storm. I thought I had seen every level of hell in that marriage until Rachel placed a thick file on the table and looked at me with an expression that was no longer calm. "Didn't just hide money," she said in a low voice. "Ivy, this is an ethical violation, far worse than anything we've prepared for." Inside were compiled documents tracing questionable spending from the clinic's operating fund, payment receipts from pharmaceutical suppliers, and inventory logs. Rachel pointed to one specific chart. "Look at this entry. A batch of morphine that expired last April was still being prescribed through September. Note says, for uninsured patients." I froze. You mean he gave expired drugs to patients? Rachel nodded, then opened an audio file, a recording from a conversation between Matthew and the clinic's medical inventory manager. His voice was unmistakable. They're not paying a dime. Old stuff works just fine, better than wasting it. It's just medicine anyway. My stomach clenched. I had always seen Matthew as arrogant, selfish, deceitful, but I never imagined he could be so cold, treating people's lives like a cost efficiency equation. I hadn't even begun to process it when Nicole called. Her voice was hoarse, whispering like she was hiding in a corner somewhere. Either I need to meet you. There's no one else I trust. I paused before answering. Where? At old cafe on Elm Street behind the bookstore. 3 p.m. I only have 10 minutes. I arrived on time, seated near the window. Nicole walked in wearing a long coat, her hair tied back, no makeup, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Are you recording this? I don't need to, I replied, my eyes steady. Talk. Nicole sat down, trembling, and pulled a brown envelope from her purse. These are printed records of the medical files Matthew forced me to alter. He deleted the names of expired drugs, replaced them with new ones, but kept using the old batches. Some patients had bad reactions, but he told me to rewrite them as environmental allergies to avoid an investigation. I opened the envelope and flipped through the papers. Nicole's signature was clear at the bottom of each, red pen edits marking every falsification. I moved. She swallowed hard. I was scared. But when you stood at that party and called the police, I realized no one else can stop him except you. I closed the file and slid it into my bag. Will you testify if needed? Nicole looked at me for a long time. If I don't, who else will? That night, I sat alone in my small home office in Lakewood. Outside the window, streetlights cast shadows of bare tree limbs across the brick walkway. I opened my laptop, accessed the Department of Justice's internal portal, and uploaded every document with detailed annotations. I didn't leak it to the press. I didn't post it online. I didn't need Matthew humiliated. I needed him prosecuted. By the law, not by rumor. 3 days later, Claudia showed up, no warning. I heard the knock around 6 p.m. When I opened the door, she stood there in a designer wool coat, high heels, and clutch, straight from a luxury fashion magazine. We need to talk, she said. I invited her in, but didn't offer a drink. Claudia sat, smoothed her skirt, and pulled a white envelope from her bag, placing it between us. This is a settlement offer. $5 million, plus full ownership of this house. In return, you drop all legal action. No more evidence to the authorities, no search warrants. I stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. Why would you think I'd accept? Claudia raised an eyebrow slightly. Because I know you still have compassion, and because no one in my family can survive a major scandal. Matthew may be guilty, but he doesn't deserve to destroy the whole family name. I gave a quiet laugh, not mocking, just tired from the irony of it all. You once said I didn't deserve the Bennett name, and now you want me to be the one to protect it? Claudia said nothing. I leaned back, looking her directly in the eye. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm doing it for the patients who were treated like garbage, for women like Nicole forced to forge documents, for people like Sophia locked away with silence. You're offering me money because you think I'm like your family, willing to trade truth for peace. But I'm not. Claudia stood. I'm warning you, Ivy. No one wins dragging others through the mud. I opened the door. You're wrong. I'm not dragging anyone. They jumped in themselves. She walked away, leaving the room thick with expensive perfume and the quiet collapse of a crumbling empire. And in that moment, I knew I had crossed a line between justice and vengeance. But I didn't feel like I was taking revenge. I felt like I was doing what was right. And sometimes the right thing is what people fear most. The Windham County Court issued the preliminary ruling on a cold morning in mid-March. I stood in the courtroom, hands clenched, as Judge Jacobs read each line from the statement. Every word landed like a gavel striking stone. Anonymous account number 4179, under the name Matthew Bennett, will be frozen immediately. All properties listed under Miss Claudia Bennett will be placed under provisional control for related investigations. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Because justice, even when it's only the first step, always comes with solitude. The next day, Nicole left town. No farewell, no goodbyes. But a few hours later, a small package arrived at Rachel's law office. Inside was a simple, old-fashioned phone. No SIM card, no password. Rachel powered it on, one video file in the gallery. I played it. On the screen, blurry but unmistakable, Claudia sat on a red velvet chair in Matthew's office, hands clasped, voice icy cold. She was born to be a background for someone else to shine. Women like Ivy, if you don't control them from the start, they'll destroy everything. She thinks she has rights? She deserves to be broken. Nicole had secretly recorded from the edge of the desk, the light reflecting off Claudia's gold-rimmed glasses. The video barely lasted over a minute, but it carried enough weight to blow apart the moral mask the Bennett family had worn for 3 generations. 2 days later, I was surrounded by reporters right outside my office door. Headlines began to pop up with titles like "Ex-Wife Seeking Revenge Through the Courts," "Ivy Bennett Saboteur or Survivor," and "Behind the Multi-Million-Dollar Lawsuit, Truth or Tactic." I stayed silent until the video was released. I didn't go through the press or hold a press conference. I simply uploaded it to a small YouTube channel I used for sharing talks about financial independence for women. No caption, no explanation, just a 76-second video titled, "When Truth Speaks for Itself." The next morning, hundreds of comments poured in. Women from all over shared their stories. Women who had been labeled weak, arrogant, undeserving. Women belittled by in-laws or cast out of the homes they helped build with all their heart by the very men they married. The media began to shift. New headlines emerged. Claudia Bennett, a modern-day symbol of gender bias. Shocking audio emerges in the Dr. Matthew Bennett lawsuit. But the real climax came from a place I didn't expect. Right in the middle of a press conference hosted by St. Michael Hospital. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The room was packed with reporters as the board chairman read a drawn-out statement about moral values not represented by individual conduct. Every word felt canned, cold, like a template apology pulled from an outdated PR handbook. Just as the spokesperson reached for the mic, Blake, Matthew's younger brother, stood up from the third row. No one had time to stop him. "I'm Dr. Blake Bennett. I've worked here since 2011. I once believed that blood should be protected at all costs." He paused, eyes scanning the rows of reporters. "But when blood uses the title of doctor to poison trust, to profit from poor patients, and to destroy women who dare to speak out, I can't stay silent." The room fell dead silent. I believe in the truth, and Ivy Bennett is right. A ripple of whispers swept through the crowd. Cameras clicked furiously. Microphones pointed toward Blake. Some board members tried to pull him back to his seat, but he shook his head and walked out, leaving the room in absolute shock. I didn't know he would say anything. None of us planned it. But those words, in front of a crowd, under the spotlight, with millions watching online, carried more weight than any court filing. And I realized not every victory needs a judge's ruling. Some truths, when spoken at the right time and place, create justice on their own. The final trial closed on a late spring day, just as the last of the snow had melted from Vermont rooftops, and lilacs bloomed across the courthouse lawn. I sat quietly in the second row, no makeup, no silk dress, just a pale gray coat and the wool scarf my mother had knitted back when I was in college. Not for warmth, but because I needed something old, something real, to keep me from falling apart. Judge Jacobs, who had overseen the long year of proceedings, read the sentence in a steady tone, though it carried a somber weight. Defendant Matthew Bennett is sentenced to 10 years in prison for organized tax evasion, abuse of power in a healthcare facility, and creating public health risks. I looked to my left where Matthew sat, hands cuffed, eyes sunken, No trace of the man who once stood before hundreds of patients vowing dedication and integrity. He didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone, just stared at the floor like he hoped time itself might disappear. Claudia wasn't present in court that day. She had been indicted for complicity and concealing financial crimes, but was placed under 3 years of house arrest due to her declining health. I heard she'd cut off all visitors, including Blake. When asked by reporters, Blake only said, "I can't protect someone who refuses to change." But what moved me most was the final portion of the verdict. For the first time in my life, I heard a legal definition for something I'd only ever felt as a foggy pain: victim of financial and social abuse. The court acknowledged that being locked out of finances, isolated from relationships, and excluded from all economic decisions was a systemic form of abuse. Bruises weren't required to be a victim. Tears weren't required to be harmed. After the verdict, Rachel gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Ivy, you didn't just win a case. You set a new precedent for thousands of other women." I didn't respond, just nodded slowly. Because I didn't feel like I'd won, I just felt free. And that was enough. 3 weeks later, the court awarded me full control over all assets in Matthew's name and a partial stake in the private hospital where he once worked. The total value reached 8 figures. Media outlets ran stories like "shunned wife becomes millionaire." But to me, that number was just debris from a battle. I didn't want to keep it all. I didn't need to take it back to prove I was right. I just wanted to start over on my terms. I signed the papers to decline a portion of the assets. The rest I used to establish a fund, the Bennett Foundation for Women's Independence. I kept the Bennett name on purpose, not to honor his family, but to redefine it. The foundation provides legal financial aid and skills training for women experiencing financial control, especially those forbidden from working, denied credit access, or cut off from friends and social networks. One of our first programs partnered with local banks to open secure, anonymous accounts for victims, along with free legal counseling. At the launch event, I wore a simple black suit, hair pulled up, standing in a modest room with maybe 40 people. No press, no cameras. Just women like me, or like I used to be, sitting quietly, eyes full of anticipation. We were taught to sacrifice, to be gentle, to protect the family's image. But I'm here to say, protecting appearances should never mean losing yourself. I paused, scanning each silent face. I don't want you to go through the same road I did. I want you to go faster, go farther, and not alone. After the speech, a silver-haired woman stepped forward and hugged me. No words, just a firm, long embrace. Then more arms joined, forming a warm circle I hadn't felt in the 12 years I lived in a house that was mine but never mine to own. And I understood, freedom doesn't come from a verdict. It doesn't come from money. Freedom begins the moment you rise from the seat someone else assigned you and choose your own path. I moved into the house at the end of a quiet street, the one I had once bought anonymously through Everpine Holdings. Back then, it was an escape plan, a shelter, a place to observe from afar. Now, it was truly my home. No footsteps measuring my every move. No questions like, "Where are you going?" or "Why did that friend text you?" Just the rustle of dry leaves on the porch and the smell of toasted bread I made myself in the morning. I didn't renovate much, kept the soft white paint on the walls, just changed the curtains, and hung up the paintings I once tucked away in storage for being aesthetic misfits. One day, while organizing the bookshelf, I found the first sketch I ever made for a financial advisory service I dreamed up 12 years ago. Matthew once called it pointless because women can't handle big numbers. I kept that sketch, framed it in my office, a reminder that what gets dismissed is sometimes just a seed waiting for the right soil. That summer, I started hosting small Wednesday afternoon gatherings. Not workshops, not lectures, just circle chats in the little room behind my house. Chairs around a soft rug, hot tea, cookies, and a whiteboard where I wrote the simplest financial concepts in my familiar slanted handwriting. What is a credit score? It's how society puts a price tag on your trustworthiness in a transaction. What is financial autonomy? It's the ability to make decisions without asking for anyone's permission. What is independence? It's knowing you can walk away at any moment and still survive. At first, there were only 3 women. One was a teacher recently divorced after 18 years of having no access to her own bank account. Another was a single mother who lost custody of her child due to unstable income. The third was a young wife who never made eye contact, only sat quietly and took notes. By the 4th week, we needed 8 chairs, then 12. By the 8th week, I started turning people away. There simply wasn't enough space. But I didn't move the meetings. I wanted to keep the closeness, the safety, the space where every woman could share her story without fear of being watched. That day, right in the middle of a session about reading bank statements and identifying suspicious deductions, a woman in the corner raised her hand. She had silver-streaked hair, a tweed jacket, and a familiar face I couldn't quite place. Miss Ivy, her voice was soft like the first rain of spring. I'm not here to learn how to open an account. I came to say thank you. I nodded gently without speaking. She walked over and placed a cream-colored envelope in my hand, handwritten, "To Ivy, from someone who once stayed silent." I opened the letter after the meeting. The handwriting was tilted, familiar, and the name at the bottom made my chest tighten. My name is Sophia. 15 years ago, I carried the last name Bennett. Not anymore. I live in a small place near a lake where no one knows me, and I'm okay with that. But if Ivy hadn't come to see me that day, hadn't reached out and touched my old journal and said, "I believe you," I might still think I was just a crazy woman. Thank you for not falling apart. Because you stood up, I found the strength to stand too. Signed, the woman who once haunted an old hospital file. I sat in that room for a long time, holding the letter. The late summer wind slipped through the doorframe, carrying the scent of maple leaves and damp earth. I didn't cry, but something warm rose up inside me, like someone had gently placed a hand on my back and gave a silent pat. At the next gathering, I spoke about Sophia. Not her name, just her story. A woman who had her voice taken from her, yet still wrote, still remembered, still documented. Truth with pen and paper when no one else believed her. I looked around that cramped room, now packed with women carrying fear, shame, and hope. One had just withdrawn from a joint account with her husband. One had just said no to getting back together for the kids. One hadn't made a move yet. Just came to sit quietly in the silence, but every one of them was alive. I smiled, placed a hand over my heart, and said slowly, "So not a single soul would be missed. I am not the only one who survived. We are living again, and this time as ourselves." Maybe you've met someone like me, a woman who stayed quiet too long until the moment came when she had to choose between enduring or rewriting her own story. Or maybe you are her. I don't share this story to complain or to seek pity. I share it so none of us have to feel alone anymore. So what's been hidden for years can finally be named. So those whose voices were taken know there's still a way forward, still a tomorrow that doesn't begin with fear. If you've ever been in a relationship that slowly erased you, or if you've seen someone enduring in silence, I invite you to leave a comment below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to begin theirs. And if you care about real stories, about family, betrayal, healing, and rediscovering your own voice, don't forget to follow this channel so you won't miss the journeys still to come. Because sometimes a single story can change the way someone sees themselves.